Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. My grandfather worked for the government. I watched video on the dark web about alien being transformed into a human, and I think that's my grandfather. I've always had a fascination with the unknown. Growing up, my grandfather was this enigmatic figure in our family, the kind of man who'd sit silently at gatherings, watching everyone with a knowing smile. He worked for the government, but he never talked about what he did. All he ever said was that he was involved in special projects, whatever that meant. My parents used to joke that he was a spy, but there was something in their eyes that suggested they weren't entirely joking. When my grandfather passed away last year, I found myself digging through the things he left behind, hoping to uncover something about his past. He had a lot of the usual old man stuff: war medals, old newspapers, and some cryptic notebooks filled with symbols and equations I couldn't understand. But then, I found a USB drive hidden inside a hollowed-out book. Curiosity got the best of me, and I plugged it into my laptop. The drive contained nothing but a text file with a link to a website on the dark web. I had never ventured there before, but I had heard enough about it to know it was where you could find the most disturbing things humanity had to offer. The link led to a video titled Project Rebirth. The video was grainy, as if it had been recorded on some old camcorder. It showed a sterile, dimly lit room. A group of men in lab coats circled an operating table. On it lay a creature that defied description, a grotesque, slimy mass of limbs and eyes that seemed to be in constant motion, as if it was struggling against its very existence. I remember feeling nauseous, a visceral reaction to seeing something that should not exist. The men spoke in hushed tones, their words barely audible over the buzzing of the fluorescent lights. They talked about transforming it, about making it human. My skin crawled as I watched them inject the creature with a series of syringes filled with strange, luminescent fluids. It convulsed violently, each movement making my heart race. I should have stopped watching. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to shut my laptop, to forget I ever found that drive. But I was hooked, a morbid curiosity rooting me to my chair. The transformation process was horrific, the creature's body contorting and reshaping itself in a way that seemed impossibly painful. Its eyes, too many to count, rolled back as its limbs twisted and shrank, the skin bubbling and melting like wax under a flame. The worst part was the screaming. It wasn't the kind of noise a human or anything from this world could make. It was a screech, high-pitched and resonating, piercing my ears and making me cover them in a futile attempt to block it out. Yet, I couldn't stop watching, couldn't tear my eyes away from the grotesque scene unfolding before me. After what felt like hours, the creature stopped moving. The room was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the lights. One of the men approached the table, cautiously, as if the creature might spring back to life. He leaned over it, examining its now human form. I was too far gone to look away now, too fascinated by what this meant. Then they lifted the thing's head, and I swear my heart stopped. The face was undeniably human, yet there was something off about it. It was almost too perfect, like a doll's face, devoid of any imperfections. And then it hit me. There was something familiar about it, too familiar. The camera zoomed in, focusing on the eyes, which were now open and looking around the room with a chilling awareness. That's when I realized who it looked like. My heart pounded in my chest, my mind racing to make sense of the impossible truth. The face staring back from the screen was my grandfather's. The rest of the video was a blur. I remember fragments, papers being signed, discussions about integration into society, something about monitoring and surveillance. I shut the laptop with trembling hands, my mind refusing to process what I had just seen. How could my grandfather have been part of this? Was he even human? For days, I was consumed by paranoia. I saw my grandfather's face in every stranger on the street, every flicker of shadow in my peripheral vision. I started digging deeper, desperate to find answers, to understand who or what my grandfather really was. I began to notice strange things in my family, little details I'd overlooked before. My parents' cautious glances at each other, the way they never talked about their pasts, how they always seemed to know when I was up to something, even when I hadn't told them. Had they been part of this too? One night, I overheard a conversation between my parents. I was coming down for a glass of water when I heard their hushed voices. My mom sounded scared, her words quivering as she spoke about the project and what he did. I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear more. "I told you we should have destroyed it," my dad said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He didn't want us to know, but now that he's gone, it's not safe." "I know," my mom replied, sounding on the verge of tears. "But what about the others? What if they come for him?" Her words sent a chill down my spine. "Others? Come for who? Me?" I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. Whatever was happening, I was in way over my head. I knew I needed to confront them, to demand answers, but fear rooted me to the spot. What if they were part of this? What if I wasn't entirely human either? In the following days, I became obsessed with finding out more about my grandfather's past. I dug through every drawer, every box in our attic, searching for clues. One night, I found an old VHS tape hidden behind a loose panel in the wall. It was unlabeled, but something told me it was important. I dusted off our old VCR and popped the tape in, my heart racing as the screen flickered to life. The footage was grainy, the kind of home video quality that spoke of decades past. It showed my grandfather, younger but still unmistakably him, talking to someone just out of frame. The conversation was mundane at first, just small talk, but then it shifted. The camera panned slightly, revealing a table with strange instruments laid out on it, things I couldn't begin to identify. My grandfather was explaining something, his words tinged with excitement and urgency. "The integration is almost complete," he said, gesturing to something out of view. "We just need to finalize the adjustments. Once it's stabilized, it can begin its mission." I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. Mission? Adjustments? The implications were terrifying, my mind racing to connect the dots. Was he talking about himself? About others like him? Then something shifted into view, a small metallic device with blinking lights. It looked like some kind of control panel, something that wouldn't be out of place in a sci-fi movie. My grandfather reached out, pressing a series of buttons with practiced ease. "Once this is done," he continued, his voice steady and calm, "there's no going back. We'll be fully integrated into society, undetectable and ready." The tape cut off abruptly, leaving me in stunned silence. My hands were shaking, the room spinning, as I tried to process what I'd just seen. This was proof, undeniable evidence that my grandfather had been involved in something far beyond the realm of normal human experience. I knew then that I had to find out more. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about my grandfather. There was something bigger happening, something that could threaten everything I thought I knew about my family, about myself. In the days that followed, I scoured the internet, searching for any mention of Project Rebirth or anything remotely connected to what I'd seen. The more I found, the more terrified I became. There were whispers of government conspiracies, experiments to create perfect human replicas, and a shadowy organization intent on blending these beings seamlessly into our world. I realized I couldn't do this alone. I needed help, someone who could guide me through the dark web of secrets my grandfather had left behind. But who could I trust? If my family was involved, I couldn't risk confronting them. Not yet. As I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering if my grandfather was truly gone, or if he'd somehow transcended death itself, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever he'd been part of, whatever secrets he'd hidden from the world, I was now a part of it too. And if there were others like him out there, hiding in plain sight, I had to find them before they found me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed to reach out to someone who could help me make sense of all this. A friend of mine from college, Dave, was a tech genius and had a knack for digging up information most people couldn't find. I hadn't talked to him in a while, but if anyone could help me navigate the dark web and uncover the truth, it was him. I gave him a call, trying to sound casual, though my voice wavered with the weight of what I had discovered. "Hey, Dave, it's been a while," I started, my fingers tapping nervously on the desk. "Hey, man, long time no see. What's up?" he replied, his voice cheerful and unsuspecting. I hesitated, unsure of how to explain without sounding insane. "I need your help with something. It's about my grandfather. I found something, and it's complicated." Dave was silent for a moment, then his tone turned serious. "All right, I'm intrigued. Let's meet up. Bring whatever you have, and I'll see what I can do." That evening, I drove to Dave's apartment, my mind racing with possibilities and fears. I clutched the USB drive and VHS tape like lifelines, the only tangible pieces of the puzzle I had. When I arrived, Dave greeted me with a casual grin, but it faltered when he saw the look on my face. We settled into his cluttered living room, stacks of old computer parts and wires strewn about. I handed him the USB drive first, explaining everything I'd seen and heard. "This is some serious X-Files stuff," Dave muttered as he plugged the drive into his laptop. "You're sure about what you saw?" I nodded, my stomach churning with anxiety. "I can't explain it, but I know what I saw. And the video is my grandfather. I'm certain of it." Dave's expression shifted to one of concern, but he didn't question me further. Instead, he focused on his screen, fingers flying across the keyboard as he delved into the contents of the drive. I watched in tense silence as lines of code and strange symbols flashed across the monitor. "Most of this is encrypted," Dave said after a few minutes, his brow furrowed. "But I think I can break it. It might take some time, though." I nodded, grateful to have someone on my side. As he worked, I told him about the VHS tape and the conversation I'd overheard between my parents. The words spilled out in a rush, my fear and confusion pouring into every sentence. Dave listened patiently, nodding as I spoke. "If your grandfather was involved in something like this, there's a chance your parents knew more than they let on. We need to be careful about who we trust." The hours passed in a blur as Dave worked his magic, his determination unwavering. I felt a growing sense of unease, like something was watching us from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Finally, Dave leaned back with a satisfied grin. Got it. Let's see what secrets your grandpa was hiding. As he opened the decrypted files, my heart pounded in my chest. The first document was a list of names, each one paired with a series of numbers and symbols I couldn't decipher. My grandfather's name was there, along with dozens of others I didn't recognize. What is this? I asked, leaning closer to the screen. Dave frowned, scrolling through the list. I think it's a registry or database of some sort, maybe the people involved in this project. The next file was a collection of research notes, written in a mix of scientific jargon and cryptic shorthand. The words Project Rebirth appeared frequently, along with references to integration and subject adaptation. My skin crawled as I read the details of the experiments, the clinical descriptions of what had been done to the alien creature, the transformation into a human form, the monitoring of its behavior, and the chilling plan to integrate these beings into human society undetected. This is insane, Dave whispered, his eyes wide with shock. They were trying to replace people with these things. A cold dread settled over me, the implications of what we'd discovered sinking in. If my grandfather had been transformed, or if he'd helped transform others, what did that mean for my family? For me? We continued reading, each new revelation more horrifying than the last. There were mentions of testing facilities, government oversight, and something called the Network, an organization dedicated to monitoring and controlling these beings. As we delved deeper, we stumbled upon a video file embedded within the documents. My hand shook as Dave clicked on it, the screen filling with another grainy recording. This time, the video showed a different setting, a lab filled with advanced technology, strange devices humming with energy. In the center of the room was a large cylindrical tank filled with a glowing greenish liquid. Inside, a figure floated, suspended in the fluid. I squinted at the screen, trying to make out the features of the figure. It was a man, and as the camera zoomed in, my breath caught in my throat. He looked eerily similar to my grandfather, but younger, with a wildness in his eyes that sent a shiver down my spine. The scientists in the video spoke in hurried, excited tones, discussing the success of the integration process and the subject's rapid adaptation to human form. They marveled at his abilities, his intelligence, and the potential for future experiments. I turned to Dave, my voice barely a whisper. Is this him?" Dave shook his head, equally bewildered. "I don't know, but whoever he is, he's part of this, and it looks like he's one of the first." The video ended abruptly, leaving us in stunned silence. I felt a deep sense of dread, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. My grandfather wasn't just involved in this project, he was one of its subjects. As we sat there, trying to process everything, a sudden crash from outside made us jump. We exchanged a glance, fear flashing in Dave's eyes. Someone, or something, was out there. "Stay here," Dave whispered, reaching for a baseball bat he kept by the door. "I'll check it out." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched him creep toward the window. I wanted to stop him, to tell him to call the police, but my voice wouldn't work. I was frozen, paralyzed by fear. Dave peered through the curtains, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the street. He stayed like that for a moment, then let out a slow breath. "Nothing," he said, turning back to me. "Probably just a raccoon or something." I nodded, trying to calm my racing heart. But deep down, I knew we weren't alone. Someone had been watching us, and they didn't want us to uncover the truth. Dave sat back down, his expression serious. We need to be careful. If this project is as big as it seems, there are people who will do anything to keep it a secret. I nodded, my resolve hardening. We had to see this through, to uncover the truth about my grandfather and the others like him. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that our every move was being monitored. The next morning, Dave and I agreed to keep digging, but we needed to be discreet. We would meet in secret, communicate through secure channels, and share information only when we were sure it was safe. As I drove home, my mind raced with possibilities. What if my parents were in on it? What if my whole life had been a lie, a carefully constructed illusion to hide the truth? That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, the sensation of being watched from the shadows. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind made me jump, my imagination conjuring images of creatures lurking just out of sight. I knew I had to be cautious, but I was determined to find out what had happened to my grandfather and why. I would uncover the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be. But as I drifted off to sleep, a chilling thought crept into my mind. What if I was next? What if they came for me, to silence me before I could expose their secrets? With that thought lingering in my mind, I fell into a restless sleep, haunted by dreams of faceless figures and twisted experiments, of a world where nothing was as it seemed. I spent the next few days on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder, feeling like I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a pair of eyes, every passerby a potential threat. I knew I needed answers, and the only way to get them was to confront my family. Gathering my courage, I decided to confront my parents. I knew it was risky, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were hiding something. I needed to know what role they played in all of this, and if they knew the truth about my grandfather. One evening after dinner, I approached them as they sat in the living room. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to find the right words. I need to talk to you about Grandpa, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My parents exchanged a glance, the kind that made my stomach twist with suspicion. My mom was the first to speak, her voice soft and cautious. What about him? She asked, her eyes fixed on mine. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I found some things, old documents and videos. They were disturbing. I need to know if you knew about it. About him. My dad shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flickering to my mom before returning to me. We were hoping you wouldn't find out about this, he admitted, his voice heavy with resignation. A chill ran down my spine. They knew. They'd known all along. Why didn't you tell me? I demanded, anger bubbling up inside me. Why keep it a secret? My mom sighed, her expression pained. We wanted to protect you. Your grandfather's work was dangerous. He wanted to keep us safe from it. Safe from what? I pressed, frustration mounting. What was he involved in? My dad leaned forward, his expression serious. It was a government project, highly classified. Your grandfather was part of a team working on advanced biological experiments. They were trying to enhance humans using alien DNA. I stared at him, my mind reeling. This was bigger than I'd imagined, more terrifying than I'd feared. So, he was one of them? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My mom shook her head. No, not exactly. He volunteered to oversee the experiments, to ensure they were ethical. But things got out of hand. He realized they were using live subjects, abducting people for their tests. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. My grandfather had been part of this nightmare, willingly or not, and my parents had known the truth all along. "We didn't know how to tell you," my dad said, his voice heavy with guilt. "We thought it was all over when the project was shut down, but then your grandfather started acting strange." I felt a cold dread settle over me. Strange how? "He became paranoid," my mom explained. "He kept saying they were watching him, that they wouldn't let him leave. He started hiding things, like the USB drive you found." Her words sent a chill through me. My grandfather had known he was being watched, that his involvement wasn't over, and now I was caught in the same web of secrets and lies. "What about the video?" I asked, my mind racing. "The one where they transformed the alien?" My dad hesitated, his expression troubled. "We don't know. We didn't even know it existed until you found it. But if it's real, it means the project might still be active." A heavy silence fell over the room, the weight of their words pressing down on us. I felt a sense of betrayal, but also a newfound determination. I had to find out the truth, to stop whatever was happening before it was too late. The following day, I met with Dave again, filling him in on everything my parents had told me. We decided to focus on tracking down the organization behind the project, to find any leads that could help us understand what was happening. We spent hours sifting through the files on the USB drive, piecing together fragments of information. Dave managed to uncover a series of emails between my grandfather and a man named Dr. Whitaker, who appeared to be one of the lead scientists on the project. The emails painted a grim picture of the experiments, discussions about integrating alien DNA into human hosts, creating a new breed of beings that could pass as human, but possessed enhanced abilities. It was clear that my grandfather had tried to stop it, warning Dr. Whitaker about the dangers of what they were doing. One email in particular stood out, sent just days before my grandfather's death. It was a desperate plea, urging Dr. Whitaker to shut down the project before it was too late. "You don't understand the ramifications," the email read. "These beings aren't stable. They'll never be fully human. We're playing with forces beyond our comprehension." The words sent a chill through me, the implications terrifying. If the project was still active, it meant these beings were out there, blending in with society, potentially posing a threat to humanity. Dave and I decided to track down Dr. Whitaker, hoping he could provide more answers. We found a possible lead, a research facility in a remote part of the state that matched descriptions from the emails. As we prepared for the trip, a sense of unease settled over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the organization knew we were onto them, but I couldn't turn back now. I needed to know the truth, no matter the cost. That night, as I packed my bags, I noticed something strange. A small device attached to the underside of my car. My heart skipped a beat as I realized it was a tracking device. They were onto us. I rushed inside to tell Dave, my mind racing with fear and paranoia. "They're tracking us. We need to be careful." Dave nodded, his expression grim. "We'll ditch the car and take the back roads. We can't let them find us before we find Dr. Whitaker." We left early the next morning, using a rental car to avoid detection. The drive was tense, every mile bringing us closer to the truth, but also to whatever dangers lay ahead. The facility was nestled deep in the woods, hidden from sight. It was a sprawling complex, surrounded by high fences and security cameras. We parked a safe distance away, using binoculars to survey the area. It was clear the place was heavily guarded, but we couldn't turn back now. We needed to get inside, to find Dr. Whitaker and uncover the truth about the project. As we plotted our next move, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The organization would stop at nothing to protect their secrets, and I had no idea how far they'd go to keep us from exposing them. With our plan set, we prepared to infiltrate the facility, hoping to find the answers we desperately needed. But deep down, I knew we were walking into the lion's den, and there was no telling what horrors awaited us inside. As Dave and I crouched in the dense woods outside the facility, the weight of our mission pressed heavily on my shoulders. The air was thick with tension, each rustle of leaves and snap of twigs setting my nerves on edge. We had to be careful, precise. One wrong move, and we'd be caught. We waited until nightfall to make our move, using the cover of darkness to slip past the guards. Our plan was simple. Get inside, find Dr. Whitaker, and uncover whatever information we could about the project and its current status. The facility loomed before us, a monolithic structure surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. The security seemed impenetrable, but we had a plan. Dave had found a weak point in the fence during our earlier reconnaissance, a spot where the ground had eroded beneath it, leaving just enough space for us to squeeze through. With our hearts pounding, we made our way to the weak point, the night air cool against our skin. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound amplified in the stillness. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching us, a sense of impending doom hanging over our heads. Once we slipped through the fence, we stuck to the shadows, avoiding the harsh glare of the security lights. Dave had a map of the facility, smuggled out by a former employee with a grudge. We navigated through the maze of buildings, our steps silent and purposeful. Our first stop was the security control room. We needed to disable the cameras to move freely through the complex. Dave, with his knack for technology, worked quickly to override the system, the glow of the monitor illuminating his focused expression. "Got it," he whispered, a triumphant smile crossing his face. "Cameras are down. We've got about 20 minutes before they reset." With the cameras disabled, we moved deeper into the facility, following the map to Dr. Whitaker's lab. My heart raced as we crept through the dimly lit corridors, each step bringing us closer to the truth and whatever consequences awaited us. Finally, we reached the lab, a sterile clinical space filled with strange equipment and rows of computer monitors. The air was tinged with a metallic scent, a reminder of the unnatural experiments conducted within these walls. Dr. Whitaker was there, a tall, gaunt man with wild hair and a manic gleam in his eyes. He looked up as we entered, his expression shifting from surprise to recognition. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and tense. "It's not safe." "We need answers," I replied, stepping forward. "We know about the project, about the experiments. My grandfather—" "Your grandfather was a fool," Whitaker interrupted, his eyes narrowing. "He thought he could control it, that he could stop what we started." "Then help us," Dave interjected, his voice urgent. "Tell us what's going on, how we can stop it." Whitaker hesitated, glancing around as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. The project was shut down years ago, but the results, they're out there, beyond our control." "What results?" I demanded, my frustration mounting. "What did you do?" Whitaker sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. We created something, a hybrid, a perfect blend of human and alien DNA. They were supposed to be superior, adaptable, but they're flawed, unstable. My stomach churned at his words, the implications terrifying. Are they dangerous? Potentially, Whitaker admitted, his expression troubled. They can pass as human, but their true nature, it's unpredictable. Some have integrated into society, but others, he broke off, a shudder running through him. Others have reverted. We've lost contact with most of them, but they're out there, hiding in plain sight. The room seemed to spin around me, the enormity of what he was saying crashing down like a tidal wave. These hybrids, these beings, were among us, and no one knew how to stop them. Is there any way to reverse it? Dave asked, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. Whitaker shook his head. We tried. Every attempt failed. The DNA integration is too complex, too ingrained. They're permanent. A heavy silence filled the room, the weight of Whitaker's words sinking in. The project had unleashed something into the world, and now it was up to us to deal with the fallout. We need to go public, I said, my voice firm. Expose the project, make people aware. Whitaker's eyes widened in alarm. You can't. The organization won't let you. They'll do whatever it takes to keep this quiet. Then help us, Dave urged. Help us get the information we need to stop them. Whitaker hesitated, torn between fear and duty. Finally, he nodded, moving to one of the computers and typing furiously. I'll give you access to the files, he said, his voice low. But you need to get out of here now. They'll be coming for you. As he spoke, the lights in the lab flickered, and an alarm blared through the facility. My heart leapt into my throat, panic surging through me. They knew we were here. We have to go, Dave urged, grabbing my arm. Now, I nodded, stuffing a USB drive filled with the files into my pocket as we raced for the door. Whitaker followed us, his expression grim. I'll cover for you, buy you some time, but be careful. They'll be watching. We sprinted through the corridors, the blaring alarm echoing around us, the sound of approaching footsteps growing louder. Fear and adrenaline pushed us forward, desperation driving us to escape. We reached the exit, the cool night air a stark contrast to the chaos inside. As we slipped through the fence, I glanced back, catching a glimpse of Whitaker standing in the doorway, a defiant look on his face. Thank you, I mouthed, and he nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the dangerous path we'd chosen. Once we were back in the woods, we didn't stop running until we reached the car, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The reality of what we'd uncovered, the danger we now faced, settled heavily on my shoulders. Oh, we did it, Dave said, his voice tinged with disbelief. We actually did it. But as I looked back at the facility, a shadowy figure emerging from the entrance, I knew our journey was far from over. The organization would come for us, for the truth we held, and we had to be ready. As we drove away, the file secured in my pocket, I realized the enormity of what lay ahead. We had to expose the project, reveal the hybrids among us, and stop the organization from continuing their experiments. But deep down, I feared we were already too late. Hybrids were out there, and their true nature was unknown. The world was on the brink of a terrifying revelation, and it was up to us to stop it before it was too late. The drive back to town was tense and silent, the reality of our situation settling over us like a dark cloud. The USB drive in my pocket felt like it was burning a hole through my clothes, a heavy reminder of the dangerous knowledge it contained. We had the evidence we needed, but getting it out to the world would be the real challenge. We reached Dave's apartment just as dawn was breaking, the first rays of sunlight casting long shadows across the street. Exhaustion weighed heavily on us, but we knew there was no time to rest. We had to act quickly before the organization caught up to us. Dave immediately set to work, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he accessed the files and began uploading them to secure servers. We'd agreed on a multi-pronged approach: leak the documents to journalists, upload them to anonymous forums, and send them to trusted contacts who could help spread the word. As he worked, I tried to calm my racing mind, the enormity of our task looming over me. We were up against a powerful organization with resources far beyond our own. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were already closing in, ready to silence us before we could expose them. Then a sudden thought struck me. My family. If the organization was onto us, they might go after my parents to keep us in check. Panic surged through me, and I grabbed my phone, dialing my mom's number with trembling fingers. She answered on the third ring, her voice tinged with confusion. "Hello? Mom, listen to me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You need to get out of the house. Go somewhere safe, now." "Why? What's happening?" she asked, alarm creeping into her voice. "There's no time to explain," I insisted. "Just trust me. Pack some essentials and leave. I'll contact you soon." She hesitated, but I could hear the urgency in my voice. "All right. We'll go to Aunt Laura's. Call us as soon as you can." I breathed a sigh of relief, knowing they'd be safer away from home. But deep down, I knew it was only a temporary measure. The organization wouldn't stop until they'd eliminated any threat to their secrecy. As I hung up, Dave turned to me, his expression serious. "The files are going live. It's only a matter of time before people start asking questions." "Good," I replied, though my voice was laced with anxiety. "We need to be ready for whatever comes next." No sooner had the words left my mouth than the door burst open, and a group of men in dark suits stormed in, guns drawn. My heart leapt into my throat, and I backed away, raising my hands in a futile gesture of surrender. "Don't move," one of them barked, his voice cold and commanding. "We know what you've done." Dave's eyes darted to me, panic flaring in his gaze. "What do we do?" he mouthed silently, his fingers still poised over the keyboard. I didn't have a chance to answer. The men advanced on us, and I knew we were trapped. But we had to buy ourselves some time, enough to get the information out and ensure it couldn't be silenced. "Think about what you're doing," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "You're part of something that could change everything. The truth needs to come out." The leader of the group stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You don't understand what you've unleashed. These hybrids are dangerous, unpredictable. We're trying to protect humanity." "By hiding the truth?" I shot back, anger flaring. "By keeping people in the dark?" "We maintain order," he replied, his voice steady. "Chaos would ensue if this became public knowledge. The hybrids need to be controlled, monitored." "And you're the ones to do it?" Dave challenged, his voice dripping with disdain. Before the man could respond, there was a sudden commotion at the door. A figure stepped into the room, and my breath caught in my throat as I recognized him. It was Dr. Whitaker. "Stop this," Whitaker said, his voice firm. "Let them go. They're not the enemy here." The leader hesitated, his gaze shifting to Whitaker. "You're interfering with our operation. Whitaker shook his head, stepping forward with a resolute expression. This isn't what we intended. We wanted to help humanity, not control it. Let them go. It's time for the truth to come out. The men exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. For a tense moment, the air was thick with anticipation, and then reluctantly, they lowered their weapons. "You're making a mistake," the leader said, his voice tight with frustration. "This will only lead to disaster." "Maybe," Whitaker replied, his gaze steady. "But it's a risk we have to take." As the men retreated, I felt a surge of relief mixed with disbelief. We'd done it. We'd taken the first step toward exposing the truth, but I knew it was only the beginning. Whitaker turned to us, his expression weary but determined. "You need to get out of here. They'll be back." "We will," Dave said, nodding gratefully. "Thank you for helping us." Whitaker smiled faintly, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "I'm doing what I should have done years ago. Go, before it's too late." We didn't need to be told twice. Grabbing our things, we bolted from the apartment, adrenaline driving us forward. As we made our way to safety, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were now part of something much larger than ourselves. The world was on the brink of a new reality, and the truth about the hybrids was out there, waiting to be uncovered. It was up to us to ensure it didn't get buried again. As we drove into the night, I knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty. But for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. We'd taken the first step, and with the truth finally coming to light, maybe, just maybe, we could change the world. And as the stars stretched across the sky, I realized that my grandfather's legacy would live on, not as a dark secret, but as a beacon of hope in a world that desperately needed it. I'm a dark web hitman. I was hired to kill a Russian mafia, and the final boss was my father. I didn't set out to be a killer. It wasn't something I dreamed about as a kid, like being an astronaut or a firefighter. It just happened. I grew up in a small town where nothing ever happened. Life was as boring as it could get, and I guess I just wanted some excitement. But nothing could have prepared me for where I ended up. It all started when I was 19, aimlessly browsing the internet, as you do. I stumbled upon a part of the web that most people don't even know exists, the dark web. It fascinated me, this hidden world full of secrets and illegal activities. It was dangerous, sure, but it was also intoxicating. There was this adrenaline rush that came with just being there, a kind of thrill that I couldn't get from anything else. And then I found it. A forum where you could offer services or hire people to do things that the light of day could never expose. One post caught my attention. Experienced hitman needed. Discretion guaranteed. High payout. The message was simple, but the idea was insane. I mean, who in their right mind would respond to that? I clicked it, of course. It was like a car crash you couldn't look away from. Curiosity pulled me deeper, and I started reading the comments. Most were jokes or trolls, but a few seemed genuine, and I couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to actually be involved in something like that. One night, after a few beers and way too much time thinking about it, I replied to the post. I didn't expect a response, and to be honest, I was half hoping they'd just laugh at my amateur attempt, but they didn't. Instead, I got a reply almost immediately. It was terse, just an email address and a message. Let's talk. Before I knew it, I was exchanging emails with a man who called himself Vladimir. He claimed to be part of a syndicate that had connections all over the world. He needed someone to take care of a problem, and he promised more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was tempting, so ridiculously tempting. I was stupid, and I let my greed get the better of me. Over the next few days, Vladimir and I worked out the details. I was to take out a low-level thug who'd been causing problems for his organization. A small fish, he assured me, but a necessary one to fry. He told me the payment would come in 2 parts, half up front and the other half once the job was done. I still remember the night I received the first payment. The money was transferred to my account in crisp, untraceable cryptocurrency. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking, but I felt alive in a way I never had before. I was on edge, terrified, but also exhilarated. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I prepared. I researched my target, studied his habits, and memorized his routines. It took me 2 weeks to build up the courage to go through with it. The thought of what I was about to do made my stomach churn, but the money kept me going. The night I did it, it was raining. I remember every detail so vividly, like it's seared into my brain. I waited outside a dingy bar where my target spent his evenings. My hands were sweaty, and my heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. When he finally stumbled out, drunk and alone, I followed him down the dark alley. The streetlights flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows that danced around us. I'll spare you the gruesome details, but it was over quickly. There was a moment of panic when he turned and looked at me, confusion etched across his face. I hesitated, just for a second, and in that moment, I saw him as a person, not just a target. But then the training took over. The practice I'd put in with the gun, the scenarios I'd played out in my head. I pulled the trigger, and just like that, it was done. As his body crumpled to the ground, the reality of what I had done hit me. I'd killed a man. There was no going back now. But instead of guilt or regret, all I felt was relief. Relief that it was over, that I hadn't been caught, that I was about to get paid. I left the scene quickly, sticking to the shadows as I made my way back to my car. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. The realization of what I'd become slowly sinking in. I was a killer now, a hitman for hire. And yet, there was a part of me that felt invincible. I'd done it. I'd taken a life and gotten away with it. The next day, the second half of the payment came through, just like Vladimir promised. I should have felt something, but I didn't. The money felt good. I was rich now, richer than I'd ever dreamed. But there was an emptiness that came with it, a hollow feeling that gnawed at me. I pushed it down, buried it deep, and told myself that this was just the beginning. But the darkness didn't stop there. The jobs kept coming, each one more dangerous than the last. I became numb to the violence, the blood, the screams. It was just part of the job, part of the thrill. I told myself it was worth it for the money, for the lifestyle I'd always wanted. But deep down, I knew there was no turning back. And then came the job that changed everything. The job that made me question everything I thought I knew. Vladimir contacted me again, this time with a special request. A high-ranking member of the Russian mafia needed to be eliminated. Someone who'd crossed the wrong people and knew too much. The payout was astronomical, more money than I'd ever seen. But there was a catch. His target wasn't just some random thug. He was someone I knew, someone I'd known my entire life. My father. The moment Vladimir mentioned the name of the target, I felt like the ground had vanished beneath me. I stared at the email on my screen, reading and rereading the words until they blurred together. It couldn't be real. My father? I hadn't seen him in years, not since he walked out on us when I was just a kid. He was a ghost, a shadow from my past that I had tried to forget. Yet here he was, suddenly back in my life in the most unexpected and horrific way. I was paralyzed with shock. The very man who had abandoned me and my mom, who had left us to fend for ourselves, was now entangled with the Russian mafia. It felt surreal. My father was supposed to be a nobody, a drunk who couldn't hold down a job, not some criminal mastermind. How had he managed to climb his way up in such a dangerous world? I couldn't ignore the job, though. Vladimir was insistent, and the money was too good to pass up. Plus, declining wasn't exactly an option. In this line of work, you don't say no to your employers unless you want to become their next target. But how could I go through with it? How could I kill my own father, even if he was a piece of shit? For days, I wrestled with the decision. I went about my usual routine, trying to keep up appearances, but inside, I was torn apart. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. It's not like I had friends who would understand. I was completely alone with this horrific choice hanging over me. I tried to learn more about my father's involvement with the mafia, hoping to find some way out, some loophole that would allow me to spare him. I delved deep into the darkest corners of the internet, hacking into databases, reading files I shouldn't have had access to. What I found only confirmed what Vladimir had told me. My father had become a liability. He knew things he shouldn't know and was threatening to expose secrets that could bring down the entire operation. One night, fueled by desperation and too much whiskey, I decided to confront him. I needed answers, and I had to see him face to face before making any decisions. It was a risky move, but I didn't care anymore. I had to know why he'd gotten involved in this mess and why he'd abandoned us in the first place. I tracked him down to a rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city. It was the kind of place you wouldn't look twice at. A grimy building with broken windows and graffiti on the walls. My heart was pounding as I approached the door, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, but I forced myself to knock. The man who opened the door was a stranger. He looked older, more worn down than I remembered. His hair was grayer, and there were deep lines etched into his face. But those eyes, those piercing blue eyes, were unmistakably my father's. The shock on his face mirrored my own, and for a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other in disbelief. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice gruff and defensive. It was like he didn't recognize me, or maybe he just didn't want to. I swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. "I need to talk to you," I said. "Can I come in?" He hesitated, glancing around as if he expected someone to be watching. Finally, he stepped aside and let me in. The apartment was as depressing as I'd imagined, cluttered, dimly lit, and reeking of cigarette smoke. "What's this about?" he asked, shutting the door behind me. "You a cop or something?" I shook my head, my mind racing as I tried to piece together my thoughts. "No, I'm not a cop. It's me, Dad. It's Alex." The recognition in his eyes was instant, followed by a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Guilt, maybe, or regret. He didn't say anything, just nodded and motioned for me to sit down. We talked for hours, well into the night. He told me about how he'd gotten involved with the mafia, about how they'd offered him a way out of the dead-end life he'd been living. At first, it was just small jobs, nothing too dangerous. But as he proved himself, They brought him deeper into the fold. He hadn't meant to get in so deep, he said, but it was too late by the time he realized the danger. He'd started talking to the wrong people, thinking he could make a deal to get out clean, but they found out, and now he was a marked man. It was a classic story of betrayal and greed, but it was different hearing it from him. This wasn't just some movie plot. It was real life, my life. Despite everything, part of me felt sorry for him. He was trapped, just like I was, but I couldn't shake the anger I felt for him leaving us, for the years of pain and uncertainty he'd caused. It was a bitter cocktail of emotions that churned inside me as we sat there, father and son, both criminals in our own ways. "Why'd you leave?" I finally asked, the question that had haunted me for years. "Why did you walk out on us?" He sighed, rubbing his face with his hands. "I was a coward," he admitted. "I didn't know how to be a father. I thought I was doing you a favor by leaving." "Some favor," I muttered, the bitterness seeping into my voice. But I understood, in a way. I'd spent my whole life running from one thing or another. Maybe it was in my blood. I left his apartment that night with more questions than answers. I hadn't decided what I was going to do, but I knew one thing. I couldn't kill him. No matter what he'd done, I couldn't bring myself to pull the trigger. I had to find another way to fix this mess. The next morning, I contacted Vladimir, telling him I needed more time. It was a risky move, but I had to buy myself a few more days. I couldn't just let my father die, not without trying to save him. But in this line of work, nothing stays hidden for long. Little did I know, my decision to confront my father had set off a chain of events that would change everything, forcing me to confront my darkest fears and face the truth about who I really was. When I woke up the next day, I felt like I was being watched. The air was thick with paranoia, and every creak of the floorboards sounded like a footstep behind me. I knew I had to tread carefully. This world I'd stumbled into didn't forgive mistakes, and I'd already made a big one by hesitating. I tried to go about my daily routine, but it was impossible to ignore the feeling that something was wrong. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Vladimir, each one more demanding than the last. He was getting impatient, and I knew it was only a matter of time before he'd lost his patience completely. I needed to come up with a plan. I couldn't trust anyone in my life. The few friends I had would never understand, and there was no way I could involve them without putting them in danger. This was my mess, and I had to clean it up alone. Desperation led me to reach out to someone I never thought I'd have to contact again, Dmitri, an old acquaintance from my early days of digging around on the dark web. He was an information broker, the kind of guy who knew things he shouldn't. If there was anyone who could help me figure out a way to get both me and my father out of this, it was him. I set up a meeting at a dingy dive bar on the edge of town, a place so shady that nobody would notice two people having a conversation in the corner. Dmitri was already there when I arrived, nursing a drink and looking as nonchalant as ever. "You look like shit," he said as I sat down across from him. "Thanks, I feel like it too," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. We made small talk for a few minutes, discussing everything and nothing at once, before I finally got to the point. I told him about my situation, leaving out certain details, of course. I didn't need him knowing the whole story, just enough to help me. Dmitri listened intently, his eyes narrowing as he processed the information. When I finished, he leaned back and studied me for a long moment. "You've really stepped in it this time, haven't you? He said, shaking his head. You know these people don't play games, right? I know, I said, a hint of desperation creeping into my voice. That's why I need your help. There's got to be something I can do, some way to get out of this. He sighed, swirling the ice in his glass. There might be a way, but it's risky. You're dealing with the Russian mafia here. They're not going to just let you walk away. I'm willing to take the risk, I said, the weight of my decision settling over me. I have to try. Dmitri nodded slowly. All right, here's what you do. There's a guy I know, goes by the name of the Cleaner. He's an expert at making problems disappear, for the right price. He's your best shot at getting your old man out of this mess. The Cleaner? I asked, skepticism in my voice. Sounds like something out of a bad movie. Trust me, he's the real deal, Dmitri insisted. But he's not cheap. And he doesn't work with just anyone. You're going to have to convince him that you're worth his time. How do I find him? Dmitri scribbled an address on a napkin and slid it across the table. Go here tomorrow night. And Alex, be careful. This guy is your last hope, but he's also dangerous. I thanked Dmitri and left the bar, my mind spinning with the possibilities. I couldn't afford to waste any more time. The clock was ticking, and I knew Vladimir wouldn't wait forever. The next night, I found myself in a seedy part of town, standing outside a dilapidated warehouse. The place looked abandoned, but the glow of a single light inside told me otherwise. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of oil and rust. The dim light cast long shadows across the room, creating an eerie atmosphere. In the center of the room stood a man, tall and imposing, with a scar running down the side of his face. This had to be the Cleaner. You Alex? He asked, his voice as rough as sandpaper. Yeah, I replied, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Dmitri sent me. He nodded, crossing his arms over his chest. I know who you are. I've heard about you, the hitman who can't finish his job. So, what makes you think I should help you? His words stung, but I pushed past the anger. I need your help to get my father out of this mess. I can pay, whatever it takes. The Cleaner studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You're in over your head, kid, but I like that you're willing to do whatever it takes. All right, I'll help you, but it's going to cost you. I nodded, relief flooding through me. Name your price. He smirked, and for a moment I saw something almost human in his eyes. First, we need to fake your old man's death. Make it look like you did your job. After that, I'll get him out of the country. How do we do that? Leave that to me, he said, pulling out a phone and tapping a few buttons. I've got a plan, but you're going to have to trust me. I didn't have much choice. I had to trust him. It was the only way to save my father and get out of this alive. Over the next few days, the Cleaner and I worked together, setting up the fake hit. It was a delicate operation, and I had to act like everything was normal, even as my nerves threatened to unravel. I couldn't afford to slip up now. Everything was going according to plan until I received a message from Vladimir. He wanted a meeting, face to face. My heart sank. I knew this was it, the final test to see if I'd completed the job. I met him in a dimly lit bar, the kind where nobody asks questions. Vladimir was already there, sitting at a table in the corner, his eyes cold and calculating. As I approached, I could feel the tension in the air, the weight of everything I'd done pressing down on me. Is it done? He asked, his voice a low growl. Yeah, "It's done," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He studied me for a long moment, and I could feel his eyes piercing through me, searching for any sign of deceit. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't see through the facade. Finally, he nodded, a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. "Good. You did well, Alex. Maybe you're not as useless as I thought." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. I knew I couldn't trust him. The cleaner's words echoed in my mind. "This guy is dangerous. Watch your back." I left the bar, my mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. The plan was in motion, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go horribly wrong. Leaving the bar, I felt the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders. I had managed to convince Vladimir, but I knew better than to let my guard down. In this world, trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. As I drove back to my apartment, the city lights flashing by like a fever dream, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Back at home, I checked the locks twice, my paranoia reaching new heights. Every shadow seemed to be watching, every noise a potential threat. I hadn't slept properly in days, and the exhaustion was starting to take its toll. The cleaner had set everything up perfectly. We'd staged a convincing scene, one that would make anyone believe my father was dead. It was gruesome work, and I could feel my soul chipping away with every detail we put into the deception. I had to remind myself constantly that this was to save him, to save us both. But there was a problem. While the cleaner was working his magic, my father had vanished. He was supposed to be lying low, waiting for us to extract him. I tried calling him, but there was no answer. Panic clawed at my insides as I realized I had no way of knowing if he'd gone into hiding or if something more sinister had happened. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Had he been discovered by the mafia, or was he simply trying to escape this nightmare on his own? Whatever the reason, I needed to find him before Vladimir discovered the truth. I hit the streets, retracing my father's steps, visiting the bars and alleys he used to haunt. I spoke to anyone who might have seen him, but all I got were blank stares or shrugged shoulders. He was a ghost, just like he'd always been. Desperation drove me to do something reckless. I went back to his apartment, knowing full well it was a risk. The place was eerily quiet when I arrived, the door slightly ajar. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I pushed forward, my heart pounding in my chest. Inside, the apartment was a mess. Papers were strewn everywhere, furniture overturned. It looked like a struggle had taken place. My gut twisted with dread as I moved cautiously through the rooms, my mind conjuring images of what might have happened here. In the corner of the living room, I found something that made my blood run cold, a single red rose lying atop a stack of documents. It was a message, clear and unmistakable. The mafia had been here, and they wanted me to know they'd found my father. My phone buzzed in my pocket, jolting me out of my thoughts. It was a message from Vladimir. "We need to talk. Now." The timing couldn't have been worse. I knew he'd found out somehow. My carefully constructed facade was crumbling around me, and I was running out of time. But I couldn't ignore the summons. If I didn't meet him, he'd know something was up, and things would only get worse. I left the apartment, my mind a chaotic mess of fear and urgency. As I drove to the meeting point, I couldn't help but wonder if this was it, if I'd finally run out of luck. The meeting was in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. As I stepped inside, the smell of damp and decay assaulted my senses. The place was dimly lit, shadows lurking in every corner. Vladimir stood in the center of the room, flanked by two of his men. Their expressions were cold, unreadable, and it took everything I had to keep my composure. "Alex," Vladimir said, his voice smooth and dangerous, "I'm disappointed. I thought you were better than this." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean?" He smirked, a predator playing with its prey. "You didn't think we'd find out, did you? That we wouldn't notice the little discrepancies?" My heart sank. He knew. Somehow, he'd discovered the truth. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, feigning ignorance. Vladimir stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Oh, I think you do. Your father isn't dead, is he? You tried to play us, Alex, and now you're going to pay the price." Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I did the job. I killed him, just like you asked." "Liar," he hissed, his voice dripping with malice. "You've been playing a dangerous game, and now you're going to see what happens when you cross us." Before I could react, one of his men lunged at me, pinning me to the ground. I struggled, but it was futile. I was outnumbered and outmatched. As they restrained me, I felt the cold steel of a gun pressed against my temple. "You had so much potential," Vladimir said, his voice almost regretful, "but you made the wrong choice." Just when I thought it was over, a loud crash echoed through the warehouse. The door slammed open and chaos erupted. The cleaner had arrived, guns blazing, taking out Vladimir's men with precision and deadly efficiency. In the chaos, I managed to break free and scrambled to my feet. The cleaner was a force of nature, moving with a lethal grace that was almost hypnotic. He dispatched Vladimir's men one by one, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. Vladimir tried to escape, but the cleaner was faster. He grabbed him, pinning him to the ground with a ruthless efficiency. "You made a mistake coming after him," the cleaner growled, his voice cold as ice. With Vladimir subdued, the cleaner turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Get out of here, Alex. This isn't your fight anymore." I didn't need to be told twice. I fled the warehouse, my heart racing, adrenaline coursing through my veins. As I stumbled into the night, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd truly escaped, or if this was just the beginning of something far darker. My father was still missing, and the mafia wouldn't stop until they found him. I had to find him first, to make things right before it was too late. The clock was ticking, and I knew the darkness was closing in. The streets felt like a maze, twisting and turning under the harsh glow of streetlights as I sped through the city, desperate to find my father before it was too late. My mind was a chaotic mess of fear and determination. I'd gotten this far, and I wasn't about to give up now. I owed him that much, at least. The cleaner had given me one last lead before I'd left the warehouse. A whispered name, Anton. Apparently, my father had reached out to him, an old contact who might have helped him disappear. I had to find Anton, and quickly. I followed the trail to a seedy bar tucked away in a forgotten part of the town, the kind of place where nobody asked questions and everybody had something to hide. As I entered, the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke enveloped me, and I scanned the room for any sign of Anton. He was sitting in a corner booth, nursing a drink and watching me with a wary eye. I approached cautiously, knowing I couldn't afford any more mistakes. Every second counted, and I couldn't let this opportunity slip through my fingers. "You, Anton?" I asked, keeping my voice low. He nodded, his gaze steady and appraising. "Depends on who's asking." "I'm Alex," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. "I'm looking for my father." I heard you might know where he is. Anton regarded me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Your father's in deep shit, kid. You both are. I know, I replied, desperation creeping into my voice. Please, I need to find him before the Mafia does. He's in danger. He sighed, taking a sip of his drink before leaning in closer. He came to me a few days ago, said he needed to disappear. I helped him, but it won't hold for long. They're relentless, these guys. Where is he? I pressed, my heart pounding in my chest. He's holed up in an old safe house outside the city, Anton said, scribbling an address on a napkin. But you need to move fast. They're closing in. I thanked him and left the bar, my mind racing as I drove toward the safe house. The streets were a blur, and all I could think about was getting to my father before it was too late. The sense of urgency was overwhelming, pushing me forward with a reckless determination. The safe house was a decrepit old cabin on the outskirts of a town, hidden among the trees. As I approached, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I parked a distance away and approached cautiously, every nerve on high alert. Inside, the place was dark and silent, the air thick with tension. I crept through the shadows, my heart pounding in my chest. When I finally found him, sitting alone in the dim light of a flickering lamp, relief flooded through me. Dad, I whispered, stepping into the room. He looked up, surprise and guilt flashing across his face. Alex, I didn't think you'd come. I had to, I said, my voice choked with emotion. I couldn't just leave you to die. He nodded, a weary resignation in his eyes. I'm sorry, Alex, for everything. I never wanted you to be a part of this. None of that matters now, I said, my mind racing with the possibilities. We have to get you out of here. The Mafia knows you're alive, and they won't stop until they find you. He hesitated, fear and regret etched into his features. I can't keep running, Alex. I've made too many mistakes. Maybe it's time I face the consequences. No, I insisted, a fierce determination burning inside me. I won't let them take you. We'll find a way. Together. Before he could respond, the door burst open, and I found myself staring down the barrel of a gun. Vladimir stood in the doorway, a triumphant sneer on his face. My heart dropped as I realized the truth. I'd led them right to him. Well, isn't this touching? Vladimir said, his voice dripping with malice. Family reunion, just in time for the finale. I moved to shield my father, but Vladimir's men surrounded us, their weapons trained on us with deadly precision. My mind raced, searching for a way out, but every option seemed to lead to the same grim end. This is it, Alex, Vladimir said, his eyes gleaming with sadistic delight. You should have stayed out of it, but now you're going to watch your father die. Panic clawed at my insides as I desperately tried to think of something, anything that could save us. But before I could act, a deafening roar filled the room. It was the cleaner, bursting through the window in a storm of chaos and violence. The ensuing fight was a blur of gunfire and chaos. The cleaner moved with deadly precision, taking out Vladimir's men one by one. The air was thick with the acrid scent of gunpowder and fear, and all I could do was duck and cover, praying we'd make it out alive. In the confusion, Vladimir tried to escape, but the cleaner was on him in an instant. They struggled, their movements a deadly dance of violence and rage. I watched, frozen, as the cleaner overpowered him, forcing him to the ground. It was over in an instant, the room falling into an eerie silence as the dust settled. The cleaner stood over Vladimir's lifeless body, breathing heavily, his expression unreadable. He turned to me, his eyes cold and hard. "You need to leave," he said, his voice a low growl. "Take your father and disappear. This isn't over." I nodded, too shaken to argue. With the cleaner's help, we made our way out of the cabin, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me. My father was safe for now, but I knew it was only a matter of time before the mafia regrouped. As we drove away, the reality of our situation settled over me like a dark cloud. We were fugitives now, running from a shadowy world that would never let us go. But we had each other, and that was enough. In the end, I realized that I'd been wrong about a lot of things. I'd started this journey for the money, for the thrill, but what I'd found was something far more important. A chance to rebuild what was broken, to save the only family I had left. As the city lights faded into the distance, I knew one thing for certain. We'd have to keep running, keep fighting, but at least we were doing it together. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. For now, the darkness hadn't won, but I knew it was only a matter of time before it caught up with us again. I watched video of my mother being murdered in a red room. The next night she woke in the middle of the night, and we moved to another country. Hey Reddit, I've never posted here before, but something happened to me recently that I just can't keep to myself anymore. It feels good to finally write this down, even though it still gives me chills to think about it. I'm not really sure how to start, but I guess I'll just dive in and tell you everything. It was a normal Saturday night, and I was sitting in my room, browsing through some random videos on the internet. I've always been into creepy stuff, like true crime stories and horror movies, so I didn't think much of it when I stumbled across a link titled Live Red Room Broadcast. I figured it was some kind of ARG or viral marketing for a new horror movie, and my curiosity got the better of me. I clicked the link, half expecting to see some poorly acted scene with fake blood and over-the-top screams, but what I saw wasn't fake at all. The screen went black for a few seconds, then flickered to life, showing a dimly lit room with red walls. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting eerie shadows across the floor. There was a woman tied to a chair in the middle of the room, her head slumped forward as if she were unconscious. Her long dark hair obscured her face, but something about her seemed oddly familiar. I felt a knot form in my stomach, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. As I watched, a man stepped into view, wearing a black ski mask and holding a large knife. He walked over to the woman and lifted her head by the hair, revealing her face to the camera. My heart stopped. It was my mother. I felt like I was going to be sick. My mind raced with 1,000 questions. How could this be happening? Was this some kind of sick joke? My mother was supposed to be asleep in her room down the hall, not tied up in some nightmare scenario. I frantically checked the time on my laptop and realized it was almost 3 a.m. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but something in me knew I couldn't. I was frozen, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The man on the screen started speaking in a low, gravelly voice, saying things I couldn't understand, like he was speaking in a different language, or something. He leaned in close to my mother's face, whispering things that seemed to make her flinch, even in her unconscious state. Then, without warning, he plunged the knife into her side. My mother's eyes shot open, and she let out a blood-curdling scream that seemed to echo through my entire room. The sound jolted me out of my frozen state, and I slammed my laptop shut, gasping for air. I felt like I was going to hyperventilate, like I was losing my mind. I sat there in the darkness for what felt like hours, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Maybe it was some kind of deep fake or an elaborate prank. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. I could feel it. In my bones, in the way my skin crawled, and my heart pounded in my chest. I needed to see if my mom was okay. I finally mustered the courage to get up and tiptoe down the hall to her room, praying with every step that I'd find her there, safe and sound. I gently pushed open her bedroom door, and there she was, sleeping peacefully in her bed, just like I hoped she'd be. I let out a sigh of relief, but something still felt off. I stood there for a moment, watching her, trying to shake the feeling that something terrible was still looming over us. I must have made some kind of noise, because she stirred and slowly opened her eyes, looking at me with a mixture of confusion and concern. "Sweetie, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice groggy with sleep. I didn't know how to respond. How do you tell your mother you just watched a video of her being brutally murdered? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I just stood there, trembling in the doorway. "Did you have a bad dream?" she asked, sitting up a little. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She gave me a gentle smile and patted the space on the bed beside her. "Come here," she said softly, and I crawled into bed beside her, feeling like a little kid again. She held me close, humming a soothing tune, and I eventually drifted off to sleep, the horrors of the night temporarily forgotten in her comforting embrace. But even in my dreams, I couldn't escape the images I'd seen. They replayed over and over in my mind, taunting me with their vividness. The next morning, everything seemed normal. My mom was up early, making breakfast in the kitchen, and the sun was shining through the windows as if nothing had happened. I almost convinced myself that it really had been a nightmare, just a figment of my overactive imagination. But then, later that day, I received an email from an unknown sender. The subject line was blank, and when I hesitantly clicked on it, my heart dropped. It was a single sentence. "Did you enjoy the show?" There was no name, no indication of who had sent it, just those 5 words mocking me, reminding me that what I'd seen was real. I felt a cold dread settle over me, and I knew I had to tell my mom what happened. I couldn't keep it a secret any longer, not with this new threat hanging over us. I found her in the living room, reading a book, and sat down beside her, my hand shaking as I tried to find the words to explain. "Mom, I need to tell you something," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked up from her book, concern etching her features as she listened. I took a deep breath and recounted everything I'd seen, the video, the man, the email, every detail that haunted me. To my surprise, she didn't dismiss it as a nightmare or accuse me of making it up. Her face grew pale, and she put the book down, her hands trembling slightly. "I think we need to leave," she said quietly, her voice tinged with fear. "Leave? What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "We need to get out of here, out of the country," she said, her eyes darting around the room as if she expected someone to be watching us. "Pack a bag, we're leaving tonight." And just like that, my world turned upside down. I had no idea what was going on, but I trusted my mom. If she said we needed to leave, then that's what we would do. I ran to my room and hastily packed a bag with whatever clothes and belongings I could fit, my mind racing with questions and fears. As I packed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that someone was lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. I kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see the masked man from the video standing there, knife in hand, ready to finish what he'd started. But no one was there, and soon enough, we were in the car, driving to the airport in silence. My mom kept glancing in the rearview mirror, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. I could tell she was scared, and that only made me more anxious. We didn't talk much on the flight, and I didn't dare ask where we were going. I just hoped that wherever we ended up, we'd be safe from whatever horrors were chasing us. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the red room, the masked man, the knife. I knew I'd never be able to forget what I'd seen, no matter how far we ran. That was the longest night of my life, and little did I know, it was only the beginning of a nightmare I couldn't escape. After a long and sleepless flight, we landed in a country I'd only heard about in passing, Switzerland. My mom had always talked about visiting the Alps someday, but under entirely different circumstances. We got off the plane, blending into the crowd of tourists, and made our way to a small hotel on the outskirts of Geneva. The hotel room was tiny, with barely enough space for the two of us and our hastily packed bags. Mom closed the curtains tightly and double-checked the locks on the door, her movements quick and methodical. It was like she had done this before. I wanted to ask her so many questions, but the fear in her eyes kept me silent. We were both running on adrenaline and fear, our hearts pounding in unison. After a brief pause, my mom turned to me, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're safe here, at least for now. I need to figure out our next move." Her calmness was unsettling, and I couldn't understand why she wasn't panicking as much as I was. "Mom, what is going on? Who was that man? Why are we running?" My questions tumbled out, each one more urgent than the last. She hesitated, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe, or fear. "I've been keeping something from you, something about my past. It's complicated, but you need to know that I was involved with some dangerous people a long time ago. I thought I'd left it all behind, but clearly I was wrong." My heart sank as I listened to her. All these years, I thought I knew everything about my mom. She was the one constant in my life, the person I trusted more than anyone. But now I realized how little I really knew about her past. I could see she was struggling with how much to tell me, the truth weighing heavily on her shoulders. She finally continued. "When I was younger, I got caught up with some people who were into things they shouldn't have been. Illegal things. I did some things I'm not proud of, and I thought I could walk away from it all. But these people, they don't let go easily. They must have found me and decided to use you to get to me." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of a history I couldn't begin to comprehend. It was like hearing about a stranger, not the mother who raised me. The room seemed to close in around me, my thoughts spiraling into confusion and fear. "So what do we do now?" I asked, my voice shaking. "We need to disappear for a while, lay low until I can figure out how to deal with this. I have some money saved up, enough to keep us going for a while. We'll be okay." Her attempt at reassurance felt hollow, like she was trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince me. That night, sleep eluded me once again. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything my mom had told me. My mind kept drifting back to the video, to the man's cold, calculating eyes behind that mask. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The next day, Mom insisted on going out to buy some supplies and get a feel for the area, leaving me alone in the hotel room. I didn't want to be by myself, but she assured me it was safer this way, that I would be less likely to be recognized. I reluctantly agreed, watching her disappear down the hallway, her figure tense and wary. Left to my own devices, I decided to try and distract myself by watching TV, hoping to find something that would take my mind off the fear gnawing at my insides. I flipped through the channels mindlessly until I landed on a local news broadcast. My breath caught in my throat as I saw the headline flashing across the screen. Mystery man sought in international crime spree. The news anchor's voice droned on about a series of crimes committed by an unidentified man across Europe, all of them eerily similar in nature. The suspect was described as wearing a ski mask, his actions captured on security cameras, but his identity always hidden. My heart raced as I realized this must be the same man who was after us. How could he be so close and yet always one step ahead? Panic surged through me, and I couldn't sit still any longer. I paced the room, my thoughts racing. I needed to warn my mom, to tell her what I'd seen on the news. I grabbed my phone and dialed her number, praying she would pick up. "Mom, you need to come back now," I said as soon as she answered, my voice trembling. "What's wrong?" she asked, her tone instantly alert. "There's a news report about him. He's still out there, Mom. We're not safe." There was a pause on the line, then she replied, "Stay calm, sweetie. I'll be back soon. Just keep the door locked and don't let anyone in. We'll figure this out together." As soon as I hung up, I heard a faint noise outside the door. It was subtle, like a soft scraping, but enough to set my nerves on edge. My mind jumped to the worst possible conclusions, visions of the masked man breaking in and finishing what he'd started. I tiptoed to the door, pressing my ear against it, straining to hear any movement on the other side. My heart pounded so loudly in my chest that it drowned out everything else, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out from the anxiety. Just as I was about to back away, I heard a low whisper, like someone muttering just outside the door. My blood ran cold, and I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped, alone in a foreign country, with danger lurking just outside the door. I grabbed my phone and texted my mom, telling her about the noise and pleading with her to hurry back. Minutes stretched into an eternity as I waited, every second filled with the fear that the door would burst open and he would be standing there, knife in hand. Finally, I heard the jingle of keys outside, followed by my mom's voice calling out to me. I raced to the door and flung it open, relief flooding through me as I saw her standing there, unharmed. "Mom, there was someone outside," I blurted out, my words tumbling over each other in my haste to explain. She frowned, glancing around the hallway before ushering me back inside. "I didn't see anyone." "Are you sure?" "I heard them, Mom. I'm not making it up." She locked the door behind us and sighed, her expression one of exhaustion mixed with determination. "Okay, we need to be even more careful. We'll have to keep moving, never stay in one place too long. It's the only way we'll stay ahead of them." The gravity of her words settled over me, and I realized just how far we'd have to go to escape this nightmare, but there was no other choice. We were in too deep, and the only way out was to keep running, hoping that one day we'd finally be free from the shadows that haunted us. As we prepared to leave once more, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, that the man in the mask wouldn't stop until he had caught us. and as much as I wanted to believe we'd be safe, a part of me knew that the nightmare was far from over. Packing up and leaving the hotel was a blur of rushed movements and hushed voices. Mom insisted we travel light, so we stuffed only the essentials into our bags and left everything else behind. She had a plan, or at least the beginnings of one, and it was enough to keep us moving forward. We took a series of buses and trains, each transfer designed to throw off anyone who might be following us. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced I'd catch a glimpse of that masked face in every passing reflection. But there was nothing. Just ordinary people going about their lives, blissfully unaware of the terror that shadowed our every step. After what felt like days of travel, we found ourselves in a small village nestled in the Swiss Alps. It was the kind of place you'd expect to see on a postcard, with snow-capped peaks and charming wooden chalets. It felt surreal, being surrounded by such beauty while carrying the weight of fear and uncertainty. The village was quiet, almost too quiet. We checked into a tiny bed and breakfast, run by an elderly couple who spoke little English but seemed friendly enough. My mom assured me this was just a temporary stop, a chance to regroup and figure out our next move. I wanted to believe we could relax, even if only for a moment, but the anxiety gnawed at me constantly. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows, set my nerves on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that the masked man was somehow still out there, closing in on us. That evening, as we sat in our room, Mom finally opened up a little more about her past. She explained how she'd gotten involved with a group that trafficked in illicit goods, and how she'd managed to escape before things turned too dark. But apparently, she'd left a loose end, something or someone she hadn't considered. Now it seemed that oversight had come back to haunt us. "Why didn't you ever tell me about any of this?" I asked, trying to understand how she'd kept such a huge part of her life hidden. "I thought I was protecting you," she replied, her voice heavy with regret. "I wanted to leave all of that behind, to give you a normal life. But I should have known it wouldn't be that easy." Her words hung in the air, and I felt a mix of anger and sympathy. It was a lot to process, and I couldn't help but wonder how different things might have been if I'd known the truth sooner. The next morning, I woke up early, the sunlight streaming through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the room. For a brief moment, I felt a sense of peace, as if everything was normal again, but reality quickly reasserted itself, and I was reminded of the danger we were in. Mom was already awake, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee, her eyes scanning the landscape outside. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes and a tension in her shoulders that never seemed to go away. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her that everything would be okay, but the words felt hollow and meaningless. We spent the day exploring the village, trying to blend in as best we could. It was hard to shake the paranoia though, and I found myself constantly scanning the faces of the locals, searching for anything out of place. I felt like we were walking on thin ice, that at any moment it could crack beneath us and plunge us back into chaos. In the afternoon, as we wandered through a local market, I noticed a man lingering nearby, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of a wide hat. Something about him set off alarm bells in my mind, and I grabbed my mom's arm, pulling her away. "What's wrong?" she asked, looking around nervously. "I think we're being watched," I whispered, nodding in the direction of the man. She glanced over, her expression hardening as she saw him. "Okay, "Let's get out of here," she said, steering us toward a side street that led away from the market. We ducked into a small alleyway, trying to lose ourselves in the maze of narrow streets. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could hear Mom's breathing quicken as we hurried along, the footsteps echoing around us like a constant reminder of the danger lurking nearby. As we turned a corner, I glanced back and caught a glimpse of the man following us. My blood ran cold, and I felt a surge of adrenaline push me to move faster, to escape the unseen menace that dogged our steps. We eventually found ourselves back at the bed and breakfast, breathless and on edge. Mom locked the door behind us, her hands trembling as she bolted it shut. We didn't speak, but the fear in the room was palpable, a living thing that pressed in on us from all sides. That night, sleep was elusive. I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the village settling into the stillness of night, every creak and rustle magnified by my fear. I was terrified that the masked man had found us, that he'd somehow tracked us down despite our best efforts to stay hidden. In the early hours of the morning, I was jolted awake by a loud crash outside our window. My heart leaped into my throat, and I scrambled out of bed, my mind racing with the possibility that he was here, ready to break in and finish what he'd started. Mom was already on her feet, peering out the window with a look of grim determination. "Stay back," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I hesitated, my instincts screaming to run, to hide, but I couldn't leave her side. I crept closer, peering over her shoulder, and saw the figure of a man standing in the street below, his face obscured by shadows. He was staring directly at our window, a knife glinting in his hand. My blood ran cold, and I felt a surge of terror unlike anything I'd ever experienced. This was real, not a nightmare, and we were in grave danger. Mom turned to me, her expression fierce and protective. "We need to leave now." We grabbed our bags, our movements frantic as we threw on coats and shoes, every second feeling like an eternity as we rushed to escape. Mom led the way down back stairs, her footsteps silent on the wooden steps, and I followed close behind, my heart in my throat. As we emerged into the alley, I glanced back toward the street and saw the man moving toward the entrance of the bed and breakfast. My breath caught in my throat, and I willed my legs to move faster, to keep up with Mom as she navigated the winding alleys, our path lit only by the faint glow of street lamps. The village was eerily silent, the only sound our hurried footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the masked man was just a step behind, ready to strike. We eventually made it to the train station, just as the first hints of dawn began to color the sky. Mom bought tickets for the next train out, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the currency, and we boarded with seconds to spare, the train pulling out of the station as soon as we found our seats. I collapsed into the seat beside her, my chest heaving with each breath, the adrenaline slowly fading to exhaustion. Mom reached over and squeezed my hand, her expression one of determination tempered by fear. "We'll find a way to stop this," she promised, her voice steady despite the uncertainty that lay ahead. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and leaned against the window, watching the landscape blur past as we sped away from the village. The nightmare was far from over, but for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. We were still running, still fighting to survive, and as long as we had each other, I knew we'd keep going, no matter what. The train rattled through the early morning light, taking us deeper into the Alps. The rhythmic clatter of the tracks was oddly soothing, a constant sound in a world that had become chaotic and unpredictable. I watched the scenery change outside the window, the snow-dusted mountains towering majestically, a reminder of the vastness of the world and the smallness of our situation. We spent most of the ride in silence, each lost in our thoughts, but I could feel the tension radiating from my mom. She kept glancing around the train car, her eyes sharp and alert, scanning every passenger as if she expected one of them to pull off a mask and reveal themselves as our pursuer. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and steady. "We need to contact someone I trust, someone who can help us disappear for good." "Who?" I asked, curious but also skeptical. So far, it seemed like we were on our own. "An old friend," she replied, her tone suggesting she didn't want to elaborate. "He has connections, knows how to get people out of sticky situations." I nodded, hoping this mysterious friend would be the answer to our problems. We had been running for what felt like forever, and I was exhausted in every sense of the word. The prospect of finding a safe haven, a place where we could stop looking over our shoulders, was almost too much to hope for. As the train journey continued, I let myself drift off to sleep, the motion of the train lulling me into a restless doze. But even in sleep, I couldn't escape the nightmares. Images of the red room and the masked man haunted my dreams, a constant reminder of the danger we faced. I was jolted awake by a sudden jolt as the train came to a halt. My heart raced as I looked around, disoriented and momentarily panicked, but it was just a regular stop. Mom reassured me with a gentle squeeze of my hand, and I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. We changed trains twice more, each time navigating the stations quickly, our eyes scanning for any sign of trouble. My nerves were frayed, every unfamiliar face a potential threat, every shadow a hiding place for the man who hunted us. Eventually, we arrived in a small town nestled in a secluded valley. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still, where life moved at a slower pace. The air was crisp and clean, the scent of pine trees and snow mixing together in a way that was both refreshing and calming. Mom led the way to a small cabin on the outskirts of the town, tucked away at the edge of a dense forest. It looked cozy and unassuming, the kind of place you'd go for a quiet retreat, not to hide from a nightmare. But it was exactly what we needed, a place to lay low and regroup. Inside, the cabin was warm and inviting, with a fire crackling in the stone fireplace and comfortable furniture that begged to be sunk into. Mom moved with purpose, checking the locks on the doors and windows before settling onto the couch with a sigh of relief. "We should be safe here for a while," she said, her voice a mix of exhaustion and hope. I nodded, sinking into the chair opposite her, the warmth of the fire seeping into my bones. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to relax, if only just a little. Over the next few days, we settled into a routine of sorts. We spent our time exploring the woods around the cabin, enjoying the quiet beauty of nature, and trying to put the horrors behind us. I found a sense of peace in the solitude, a chance to breathe and gather my thoughts. But despite the tranquility, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the man in the mask was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I tried to push the fear aside, to focus on the present, but it was always there, a nagging worry that refused to be silenced. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, I noticed something unusual, a glint of metal in the trees, just beyond the edge of the clearing where the cabin sat. My heart skipped a beat, and I squinted into the gathering darkness, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "Mom," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's something out there." She moved to the window, peering out with a frown. "Where?" I pointed to the spot, my finger trembling slightly. "There, in the trees. It looks like a camera or something." Her face paled, and she stepped back, her expression one of alarm. "Pack a bag, quickly," she ordered, her voice tense. We moved swiftly, gathering our essentials and stuffing them into backpacks, our movements fueled by adrenaline and fear. My mind raced with questions and possibilities, but there was no time to dwell on them. We needed to move, to disappear before it was too late. As we stepped out of the cabin, the cold air bit into my skin, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. The forest loomed around us, dark and foreboding, but there was no other choice. We plunged into the trees, our footsteps muffled by the soft carpet of pine needles. We moved through the forest, navigating by moonlight and instinct, each step taking us further from the safety of the cabin and deeper into the unknown. My heart pounded in my chest, a steady rhythm of fear and urgency, and I could hear Mom's breathing, steady and determined beside me. After what felt like hours of walking, we emerged onto a narrow road, the headlights of a solitary car illuminating the path ahead. Mom flagged it down, and we climbed into the back seat, grateful for the warmth and the promise of distance from the cabin. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, didn't ask questions. He simply nodded as Mom gave him a destination, a larger town where we could catch another train and continue our journey. As the car sped down the winding road, I glanced back, half expecting to see the masked man emerge from the trees. But there was nothing, just the darkness closing in around us, a constant reminder of the danger we couldn't escape. For now, we were safe, but the road ahead was long, and the nightmare was far from over. I leaned back in the seat, my mind racing with thoughts and fears, and prayed that we'd find a way to stop running, to finally put an end to the terror that haunted us. The town we arrived in was bustling with life, a stark contrast to the isolation of the cabin and the eerie silence of the woods. It was a small but vibrant community, with people going about their daily routines, blissfully unaware of the nightmare that had become our reality. The streets were lined with colorful shops and cafes, their windows glowing warmly against the cold night. We checked into a modest hotel, using cash and false names to avoid any paper trails. Mom's old friend had come through for us, setting up accounts and identities that couldn't be traced back to us. It was a small comfort, knowing we had someone on our side, even if they were in the shadows. That night, as we lay in our separate beds, the events of the past few weeks weighed heavily on my mind. I replayed everything over and over, trying to make sense of it all. Why us? Why now? I couldn't help but feel that there was more to the story than my mom was letting on. In the morning, I awoke to the sound of my mom whispering urgently into her phone, her back turned to me as she spoke in hushed tones. I caught snippets of the conversation, words like safe house and protection, and my curiosity was piqued. When she hung up, she turned to me, her expression a mix of hope and anxiety. "Oh, we're going to meet someone who can help us," she said, her voice filled with determination. "A friend of a friend. They have connections, ways to keep us hidden." I nodded, trusting her judgment, even though the thought of meeting another stranger filled me with unease. But we didn't have much of a choice. We were running out of options, and the threat of the masked man was never far from my mind. Later that day, we made our way to a small cafe on the edge of town, a quiet place where locals gathered for coffee and conversation. We sat at a corner table, waiting for our contact to arrive, each passing moment stretching into eternity. Finally, a tall woman with striking features approached our table, her eyes sharp and calculating as she assessed us. She introduced herself as Lena, and there was an air of confidence about her that made me feel both wary and reassured. "Your friend sent me," she said, her voice low and steady. "I'm here to help you disappear." Mom nodded, her gratitude evident despite the fear that lingered in her eyes. "Thank you," she replied, her voice tinged with relief. Lena outlined a plan, a way to slip through the cracks and vanish completely, to start fresh in a place where no one knew us. It involved new identities, new lives, a chance to escape the nightmare and find peace. As we listened to her, I felt a glimmer of hope, the possibility of a future free from fear. But that hope was tempered by the knowledge that we were leaving everything behind, stepping into the unknown with nothing but trust in a stranger and faith in my mom's judgment. Before we parted ways, Lena handed us a small envelope. "These are your new documents," she explained. "Everything you need to start over. I'll make sure your trail is covered, but you need to be careful." Mom thanked her again, and we left the cafe, our hearts lighter with the promise of a new beginning. We spent the rest of the day preparing for our departure, packing our bags with the essentials and disposing of anything that might link us to our past. That night, as we lay in the darkened hotel room, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The idea of starting over, of building a new life, was daunting, but also liberating. It was a chance to be free, to escape the shadows that had haunted us for so long. But even as I tried to sleep, a lingering unease gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the masked man was still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I wondered if we'd ever truly be free, or if the nightmare would follow us no matter how far we ran. The next morning, we boarded a train bound for the coast, the beginning of our journey to a new life. As the landscape blurred past, I watched my mom's reflection in the window, her expression one of quiet determination and hope. She was ready to fight for our future, to protect us from the ghosts of the past. And as the train carried us away, I vowed to do the same. We were survivors, my mom and I, and we would keep running, keep fighting, until we found the peace we so desperately craved. For now, the world was full of possibilities, and we were free to explore them, to build a life away from the shadows that had chased us. The road ahead was uncertain, but we faced it together, ready to embrace whatever came our way. And though the past was never far behind, we held on to the hope that someday, somehow, we would finally find a place to call home.